I can barely believe what just happened. I'm lying here in this sterile hospital recovery room, still groggy from emergency surgery that nearly killed me, staring at my phone in complete shock. My 4-year-old twins, Jake and Emma, are home alone right now because my own parents just told me they refuse to watch them. They actually called me a nuisance and a burden after everything I've sacrificed for them financially over the past 2 years. Why? Because they have tickets to see Elton John with my sister Sarah tonight. My appendix almost ruptured, I could have died, and they chose a concert over their own grandchildren's safety. I'm about to make a phone call that will change everything. Let me back up and explain how I got to this moment of absolute betrayal. My name is Dimitri, I'm 32 years old, and I work as a software engineer for a tech company here in Austin, Texas. Life hasn't been easy since my wife Lisa died in a car accident 2 years ago. One moment we were planning our future together, raising our beautiful twins Jake and Emma, and the next moment I was a single father trying to figure out how to keep our world from falling apart. After Lisa passed away, my parents Patricia and Robert stepped in to help with the kids occasionally. They seemed genuinely caring and supportive during those first few months of grief. But then things started changing. They began mentioning their financial struggles more frequently. My dad had been laid off from his job at the manufacturing plant, and my mom's part-time work at the dental office wasn't covering their mortgage and medical bills. Being their only son, I felt obligated to help. I started sending them $800 every month to help with their expenses. It wasn't easy on my budget as a single parent, but I figured family takes care of family. I cut back on restaurants, canceled subscriptions, and even delayed some home repairs to make sure they had what they needed. They seemed so grateful, always telling me what a wonderful son I was, and how they didn't know what they'd do without my support. Yesterday morning started like any other day. I was making breakfast for Jake and Emma when this incredible pain hit my lower right abdomen. At first I thought maybe I'd pulled a muscle or eaten something bad. But within an hour, the pain became so intense I could barely stand up straight. The twins were getting worried seeing me doubled over, so I called my neighbor Mrs. Peterson to watch them while I drove myself to the emergency room. The doctors at Cedar Park Regional Medical Center took one look at me and immediately ordered blood tests and a CT scan. Dr. Martinez came back with results that made my blood run cold. My appendix was severely inflamed and on the verge of rupturing. He explained that if it burst, the infection could spread throughout my abdomen and potentially kill me. I needed emergency surgery within the next few hours. Lying on that hospital gurney getting prepped for surgery, all I could think about were my children. Mrs. Peterson had already called saying she could only watch them for a couple hours because of her own commitments. I needed someone reliable to stay with Jake and Emma for at least the next 2 or 3 days while I recovered from surgery. Naturally, I called my parents. After all, they were the grandparents. They lived only 20 minutes away, and I'd been supporting them financially for 2 years. Surely this medical emergency would bring out their caring, supportive side. My mother Patricia answered on the 3rd ring, and I quickly explained the situation. I told her about the surgery, about how serious it was, and asked if she and Dad could please come stay with the twins until I was well enough to care for them again. There was this long pause on the other end of the line. Then my mother's voice came back, but it sounded cold and distant in a way I'd never heard before. Dimitri, I'm really sorry about your appendix, but your father and I can't help with the children tonight. Sarah surprised us with tickets to see Elton John at the Moody Theater. It's our anniversary gift from her, and we've been looking forward to this for weeks. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, this is a medical emergency. I could die if my appendix ruptures. Jake and Emma need their grandparents right now. Her tone became even more irritated. Don't be so dramatic, Dimitri. It's just appendix surgery. People have it all the time. You'll be fine. Besides, Sarah spent a lot of money on these tickets and we can't disappoint her. That's when my father got on the phone, and his words cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel ever could. Son, I'm going to be straight with you. Your mother and I are tired of you using money as leverage to control our lives. Every time you need something, you act like we owe you because you help us out financially. It's manipulative. And honestly, you've become a burden we're getting tired of carrying emotionally. A burden. Their own son, lying in a hospital bed about to undergo emergency surgery, was a burden to them. Dad, I've never used money to control you. I help because I love you and want to make sure you're okay. And I'm not asking for anything unreasonable here. I'm asking you to watch your grandchildren while I have life-saving surgery. Look, we already made plans with Sarah and we're not changing them. You're a grown man, Dimitri. Figure it out yourself instead of always running to mommy and daddy when things get tough. But then I heard something in the background that made my stomach drop even further. My father was talking to someone else and he wasn't being quiet about it. Yeah, the new car payment isn't due until next week, so we should be fine. And the cruise deposit only needs to be made by Friday. New car payment. Cruise deposit, I'd been sending them $800 a month because they claimed to be struggling financially, barely able to make ends meet. Yet here they were discussing luxury purchases like they had money to burn. Dad, what new car? What cruise? I thought you guys were having trouble paying your bills. The line went quiet for a moment. Then my father cleared his throat awkwardly. That's none of your business, son. Just because you send us some money doesn't mean you get to control how we spend every penny. That's when the reality hit me like a freight train. My parents had been lying to me about their financial situation. They'd been taking my money I could have been putting toward my children's college funds or our own family's security and using it for vacations and luxury items while telling me they were struggling to survive. The betrayal was complete. Not only were they refusing to help their grandchildren during a medical emergency, but they'd been deceiving me about their need for financial support all along. And they had the audacity to call me a burden while living off my generosity based on lies. You know what, Dad? Don't worry about it. I'll figure something else out. And while I'm at it, I'll figure out a lot of other things too. I hung up the phone just as the anesthesiologist came to take me to surgery. As the medication started taking effect, the last clear thought I had was that my relationship with my parents would never be the same again. When I woke up in recovery 3 hours later, the first thing I did was call a professional childcare service. I wasn't going to let my children suffer because their grandparents had chosen selfishness over family responsibility. The agency sent me Martha, a certified nanny with 20 years of experience and glowing references. Martha arrived at my house within 2 hours, and I could immediately tell she was exactly what Jake and Emma needed. She was a kind woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and a warm smile that put the children at ease instantly. She listened carefully as I explained their routines over the phone from my hospital bed, asked thoughtful questions about their preferences, and assured me that they would be in excellent hands. The twins took to Martha immediately. When I called that evening to check in, Jake got on the phone excitedly telling me about the dinosaur puzzle they'd worked on together. And Emma chattered about the story Martha had read to them before dinner. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like my children were truly safe and cared for. But that sense of relief was short-lived. Around 8 o'clock that night, my phone rang. It was my sister Sarah, and her voice had that fake sweetness that I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign over the years. Hey, big brother, I heard about your surgery. How are you feeling? I'm recovering, Sarah. No thanks to our parents who decided an Elton John concert was more important than watching their grandchildren during a medical emergency. There was a pause, and then Sarah's tone shifted completely. The fake sweetness disappeared, replaced by something much more calculated and cold. Actually, Dimitri, I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's time someone had an honest conversation with you about your relationship with mom and dad. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been using them as your personal babysitting service for 2 years while acting like some kind of generous benefactor because you send them money. You've made them feel guilty and obligated to drop everything whenever you snap your fingers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah, I asked them to watch their grandchildren during emergency surgery. How is that unreasonable? Because you always do this, Dimitri. You act like because you help them financially, they owe you whatever you want whenever you want it. It's manipulative and controlling. Her words stung, but something about her tone told me there was more to this story. Sarah had never been particularly close to our parents growing up. She'd struggled through college, dropped out twice, failed to hold down steady jobs, and generally lived a chaotic lifestyle that worried everyone in the family. Why was she suddenly so protective of them? Sarah, where is this coming from? Since when do you care so much about mom and dad's feelings? That's when her mask slipped completely. Since I realized what kind of person you really are, Dimitri, do you have any idea how it feels to listen to our parents constantly talking about their successful, responsible son while I'm sitting right there? How it feels to know that you're their favorite because you have money and I don't? And there it was. This wasn't about our parents at all. This was about Sarah's jealousy and resentment toward me. She'd orchestrated this whole situation to prove some twisted point about family dynamics. So you convinced them to refuse to help me during a medical emergency just to prove what exactly? I wanted to show them that you're not as selfless and wonderful as they think you are. That when they finally stand up to you and say no, you'll turn nasty and vindictive just like I knew you would. Sarah, this isn't about money or control. This is about my children needing care while their father was in surgery. How could you manipulate mom and dad into abandoning their grandchildren? I didn't have to manipulate anyone, Dimitri. I just helped them see the truth about how you've been treating them. They made their own choice. But Sarah wasn't finished. She was on a roll now, letting years of resentment spill out. Do you know what it's like being the family disappointment while you get praised for every little thing? You think you're so perfect with your engineering degree and your big salary and your perfect little family? Well, now mom and dad see what happens when they don't bow down to your demands. After that phone call, I felt emotionally drained on top of being physically weak from surgery. But I was also starting to see the bigger picture of what had really happened. This wasn't just about my parents making a selfish choice. Sarah had been working behind the scenes to poison them against me, playing on their fears and insecurities to create this confrontation. The next morning, Martha called with her daily update on the twins. They'd slept well, eaten a good breakfast, and were asking when Daddy was coming home. But at the end of our conversation, Martha hesitated for a moment. Mr. Dimitri, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I wanted you to know something that might be important. Of course, Martha, what is it? Well, I've been working with families in this neighborhood for quite a while now. I actually provided care for the Henderson family next door to you last year when Mrs. Henderson had her knee surgery. Okay. During that time, I got to know some of the neighbors, including your parents, when they would come to pick up Jake and Emma for visits. And I have to say there seemed to be some contradictions in the things they would say. My stomach started to tighten. What kind of contradictions? Well, to the neighbors, your parents would brag about having such a generous and successful son who took such good care of them. They'd talk about how proud they were of you and how grateful they were for your support. But then to other people, they would complain about feeling controlled and manipulated by your help. It seemed like they were telling different stories to different people. This revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. My parents had been playing both sides, accepting my financial support, while simultaneously building a narrative that I was somehow controlling them with that support. They were taking credit for having a successful son while also painting themselves as victims of my generosity. There's something else, Mr. Dimitri. Last week when I was walking through the neighborhood, I saw your parents picking up the children in a brand new Mercedes. It looked like a very expensive car for people who were supposed to be struggling financially. A new Mercedes. While I'd been cutting back on expenses and delaying home repairs to send them money for their supposed financial hardships, they'd been driving around in a luxury car. The level of deception was staggering. Martha, thank you for telling me this. I really appreciate your honesty. I just thought you should know. Family situations can be complicated, but you deserve to understand what's really been going on. After that conversation, I realized that my parents' betrayal during my medical emergency was just the tip of the iceberg. They'd been living a lie for months, taking my money under false pretenses while building resentment against me for providing the very help they'd asked for. And Sarah had been stirring the pot behind the scenes, feeding their resentment and manipulating the situation to create maximum drama. I was dealing with more than just selfish parents who'd prioritized a concert over their grandchildren. I was dealing with a family that had been systematically deceiving me while accepting my financial support and then using that support as evidence that I was controlling them. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd initially realized, and I knew that my response would have to be equally comprehensive. By the time I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this betrayal slide, and I wasn't going to continue being manipulated by people who clearly had no respect for me or appreciation for my sacrifices. But before I took any action, I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening. My first stop was to contact my friend Trevor, who works as a loan officer at First National Bank here in Austin. Trevor and I had been friends since college, and I knew he would give me honest information if he could. I explained the situation and asked if he could look into my parents' mortgage status without violating any privacy laws. What Trevor told me made my blood boil. "Dimitri, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but given the circumstances, I think you need to know. Your parents' mortgage was paid off completely 6 months ago. They received a settlement from a slip and fall lawsuit against a grocery store chain. The settlement was substantial enough to not only pay off the mortgage, but also provide them with a significant amount of leftover cash. Paid off 6 months ago. I'd been sending them $800 a month for 6 additional months, after they no longer needed any help with housing costs. That was almost $5,000 that I could have been putting toward Jake and Emma's college funds instead of funding my parents' secret luxury lifestyle. Trevor, are you absolutely sure about this?" "Positive. I processed some of the paperwork myself. Your mother came in with a settlement check for $135,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance of $87,000, they still had close to $50,000 left over. $50,000 in cash, plus no mortgage payments, plus my monthly $800. No wonder they could afford a new Mercedes and cruise deposits. They'd been living like millionaires while convincing me they were barely scraping by. But I needed more information before I made any moves. I called my accountant Helen and scheduled an appointment to review my financial records. I wanted to see exactly how much money I'd given my parents over the past 2 years and what opportunities I'd missed by diverting that money away from my own family's needs. Helen's analysis was sobering. In total, I'd sent my parents $19,200 over the course of 24 months. Money that could have been invested in the twins' education funds, used for home improvements that I'd been postponing, or saved for family vacations that we'd skipped because I thought we couldn't afford them. Dimitri, if you'd been investing this money in a college savings plan, you'd already have over $20,000 working for your children's future, and that's not counting compound interest over the next 14 years. The opportunity cost was staggering. I'd robbed my own children's future to fund my parents' lies and luxury lifestyle. That evening, I sat down at my computer and began composing an email. I wasn't going to have another phone conversation where they could interrupt me, manipulate the narrative, or hang up when things got uncomfortable. I wanted everything documented in writing. The email took me 3 hours to write. I detailed every sacrifice I'd made to help them financially, every restaurant meal I'd skipped, every home repair I'd postponed, every family outing I'd canceled to make sure they had the money they claimed to need. I explained how their betrayal during my medical emergency had opened my eyes to the larger pattern of deception and manipulation that had been going on for months. I listed the facts as I now understood them. The paid-off mortgage, the settlement money, the new Mercedes, the cruise deposits, the way they'd been telling different stories to different people about our relationship, and finally the way they'd chosen a concert over their grandchildren's safety during a genuine family emergency. I concluded the email by informing them that I was immediately ending all financial support effective immediately. No more monthly payments, no more emergency assistance, no more enabling their dishonest lifestyle. And until they acknowledged their deception, took full responsibility for their actions, and provided a genuine apology, I would have no contact with them. I sent copies of the email to both of my parents and to Sarah. I wanted everyone to have the same information so there could be no confusion about my position or my reasons for taking this action. The response was swift and predictable. Within 2 hours, my phone started ringing. First my mother, then my father, then Sarah. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to engage in conversations that would inevitably turn into justifications, excuses, and attempts to guilt me back into my previous role as their financial enabler. The voicemails were a mix of anger, defensiveness, and panic. My mother claimed I was being vindictive and cruel. My father accused me of abandoning family when they needed me most. And Sarah's message was filled with accusations that I was proving her point about being controlling and manipulative. But the most telling voicemail came from Sarah later that night. She was clearly panicked, and her words revealed much more than she probably intended. "Dimitri, you need to call me back right now. You don't understand what you've done. Mom and Dad co-signed a loan for me to start my boutique business, and they used your monthly payments as proof of income on the application. Without that money continuing to come in, they won't be able to make the loan payments and their house could be at risk. You're going to ruin everything because of your stupid pride." And there it was. The final piece of the puzzle that explained Sarah's involvement in this whole situation. She hadn't been trying to teach me a lesson about being controlling. She'd been manipulating our parents into a loan arrangement that depended on my continued financial support without my knowledge or consent. Sarah had used my money as collateral for her business venture, making our parents liable for a debt that was predicated on my generosity continuing indefinitely. She'd turned my support for our parents into an investment in her own entrepreneurial dreams. And when I'd asked for help during a medical emergency, she'd convinced them to refuse in order to prove that they weren't dependent on me. But now she was panicking because she realized that her scheme required my cooperation, and she'd just destroyed any chance of getting it. The level of manipulation and deception was breathtaking. Not only had my parents been lying about their financial situation, but they'd also allowed Sarah to use my support as the foundation for additional financial obligations that I'd never agreed to take on. I was being used by all three of them in different ways, and my medical emergency had simply been the catalyst that brought all of their deceptions out into the open. As I sat there processing this information, I realized that cutting off financial support wasn't going to be enough. I needed legal advice to protect myself from whatever financial entanglements they might have created using my name or my income as a basis for their schemes. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was potentially fraud, and I needed to take steps to protect myself and my children from the consequences of their financial manipulation. The next morning, I called Amanda Rodriguez, a family law attorney who'd been recommended by a colleague at work. I explained the entire situation from the medical emergency to the financial deceptions to Sarah's revelation about the loan. Amanda listened carefully, taking notes, and when I finished, her response was both reassuring and alarming. "Dimitri, I'm glad you came to me before this situation gets any worse. What you're describing could potentially constitute fraud, depending on how your parents and sister have been using your income information and financial support." "What do you mean by fraud?" "Well, if they've been representing your monthly payments as guaranteed income on loan applications without your knowledge or consent, that could be considered fraudulent misrepresentation. Banks make lending decisions based on reliable income sources. And if your parents allowed Sarah to believe that your support would continue indefinitely, they may have helped her obtain credit under false pretenses." Amanda explained that I needed to immediately document everything and protect myself legally before my family's financial schemes could cause me any personal liability. I'm going to recommend that we send cease and desist letters to all three family members, making it clear that you've withdrawn all financial support and that any previous payments should not be considered ongoing income for any purpose. We'll also want to pull your credit reports to make sure your name hasn't been used on any documents without your permission. That afternoon, Amanda's assistant sent official letters to my parents and Sarah, legally documenting my withdrawal of financial support and warning them not to use my name or income information for any financial purposes going forward. The letters were delivered by certified mail to ensure that there would be no question about whether they'd received them. While we waited for responses to the letters, Amanda arranged for comprehensive credit monitoring to be set up on my accounts. She also advised me to change banks and move my assets to new accounts that my family couldn't access or reference. Over the next few days, the calls and voicemails from my family became increasingly desperate and aggressive. My mother left tearful messages claiming that I was destroying their lives over a misunderstanding. My father's messages alternated between anger and pleading, insisting that they'd done nothing wrong and that I was overreacting to a simple disagreement. But it was the messages from Sarah that revealed just how deep this deception went. Dimitri, please call me back. You don't understand the full situation. Mom and Dad didn't know that using your payments as income verification was a problem. The loan officer told them it was fine as long as the payments had been consistent. You can't just cut them off without warning when there are legal obligations involved. Legal obligations that I'd never agreed to. Financial commitments made in my name without my knowledge. Sarah had created a web of dependencies that assumed my continued cooperation, and now that I was refusing to participate, the entire structure was collapsing. The twins were adjusting well to life without their grandparents' involvement. Martha had extended her stay to help with their routine, while I recovered fully from surgery, and Jake and Emma seemed happier and more settled than they'd been in months. They asked about Grandma and Grandpa a few times, but when I explained that sometimes adults make choices that require consequences, they accepted it with the resilience that children often show in difficult situations. Jake even said something that broke my heart and made me proud at the same time. Daddy Grandpa told me he was going to take us to Disney World with the special money you send him. But if Grandpa was using your money for trips, does that mean he was taking money away from our college funds? My 4-year-old son had understood the basic unfairness of the situation better than the adults involved. That's right, buddy. Daddy was trying to help Grandma and Grandpa because I thought they needed help. But they were using that help for fun things instead of important things, and that wasn't honest. So now you can put the money in our college funds instead. Exactly right, Jake. That's exactly what Daddy's going to do. But Amanda called that afternoon with news that made the situation much more serious than I'd initially realized. Dimitri, I've completed the credit report analysis and we have a significant problem. There are 3 loans on your credit report that you didn't apply for totaling $75,000. It appears that someone has been using your personal information to obtain credit without your permission. My stomach dropped. What kind of loans? 2 are personal loans from different banks, and 1 is a business line of credit. All 3 list your income as the primary qualification for approval, and all 3 have your social security number associated with them. Identity theft. Sarah hadn't just manipulated our parents into co-signing a loan that depended on my support. She'd actually forged my signature and used my personal information to obtain credit directly. Amanda, what does this mean for me legally? It means you're the victim of identity theft, which is a federal crime. But it also means you could be held liable for these debts unless we take immediate action to dispute them and file criminal charges against whoever committed the fraud. Amanda walked me through the process of filing police reports for identity theft and fraud. She explained that we would need to provide all of the documentation about my family's financial deceptions, along with evidence that I had never authorized anyone to use my information for credit applications. Dimitri, I have to ask you directly. Did you ever give your parents or your sister permission to use your social security number or income information for any loan applications? Absolutely not. I had no idea any of this was happening until Sarah let it slip in her voicemail. Then we're dealing with clear-cut identity theft, and you need to file charges immediately to protect yourself. The thought of having my own family arrested was devastating, but Amanda made it clear that I didn't have a choice if I wanted to protect my financial future and my children's security. If you don't take action, you could be held responsible for $75,000 in debt that you didn't create. That could destroy your credit, affect your employment, and even put your house at risk. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the police report forms that Amanda had given me. Filing these papers would officially accuse my parents and sister of federal crimes, but not filing them would allow them to continue destroying my financial stability and potentially put my children's future at risk. The decision was heartbreaking but clear. I filled out the reports and scheduled an appointment with Detective Williams at the Austin Police Department for the next morning. As I was finishing the paperwork, Detective Williams called with information that changed everything again. Mr. Dimitri, I've been reviewing the preliminary information you provided, and I wanted to give you a heads up about something we discovered. Your sister's name has come up in connection with a larger fraud investigation we've been conducting. We have reason to believe she may be part of an organized identity theft ring that's been operating across Central Texas. An organized identity theft ring. Sarah wasn't just manipulating family members for personal gain. She was potentially part of a criminal organization that specialized in stealing identities and defrauding financial institutions. Detective, what does this mean for my case? It means that your family situation may be connected to a much larger criminal enterprise. We're going to need to expand our investigation to determine how deep this goes and whether your parents were willing participants or victims themselves. Could my children be at risk? That's what we need to find out. If your sister has access to your family's personal information, including your children's social security numbers, we need to act quickly to prevent any further identity theft. The next morning, I met with Detective Williams and provided him with all of the documentation I'd gathered. Bank records showing my payments to my parents, email copies of our correspondence, voicemails from Sarah revealing the loan situation, credit reports showing the unauthorized accounts. Detective Williams reviewed everything carefully and then delivered news that made my blood run cold. Mr. Dimitri, based on what you've shown me and what we already know about the larger investigation I'm recommending, that we execute search warrants on your parents' house and your sister's apartment immediately. We have probable cause to believe that this identity theft scheme may involve multiple victims, and time is of the essence. What about my parents? Are they considered suspects or victims? That depends on what we find during the search. If they knowingly participated in using your information for fraudulent loans, they'll face charges. If Sarah manipulated them without their full understanding, they may be victims too, but either way, we need to stop this before it gets worse. 2 hours later, Detective Williams called with the results of the search warrants. Mr. Dimitri, we need to talk immediately. We found evidence at your sister's apartment that suggests this case is much bigger than we initially thought. Can you come down to the station right away? As I drove to the police station, I realized that what had started as a family disagreement over babysitting during a medical emergency had revealed a criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed my entire life. And the knock that would come in 2 weeks would bring news that I never could have imagined. When I arrived at the police station, Detective Williams led me to a small conference room where several boxes of evidence were laid out on the table. What I saw made me realize that my family's betrayal was far worse than I'd ever imagined. Mr. Dimitri, what we found during the search warrants has turned this into a federal investigation. Your sister wasn't just stealing your identity for personal loans. She's been running a sophisticated identity theft operation that involves dozens of victims across multiple states. Detective Williams showed me photocopies of documents that made my hands shake. credit applications with my forged signature, bank account opening forms using my social security number, even applications for credit cards that I'd never seen before. How long has this been going on? Based on the dates on these documents, at least 2 years. Your sister has been systematically stealing and selling personal information, and your parents' house was being used as a base of operations for much of it. My parents knew about this. That's where it gets complicated. We found evidence that your parents were receiving cash payments for providing access to family members' personal information, bank deposits that correspond with times when your sister was particularly active in her fraudulent applications. Detective Williams pulled out a folder marked with my name. Mr. Dimitri, I need to show you something that's going to be very difficult to see. We found documents that suggest your sister was planning to steal your children's identities as well. He handed me a sheet of paper that listed Jake and Emma's full names, birth dates, and social security numbers. Next to their information were notes about future opportunities and 18-year timeline. She was going to wait until they turned 18 and then use their clean credit histories to obtain student loans and credit cards that she had no intention of paying back. By the time your children would have discovered the fraud, their credit would have been destroyed before they even entered adulthood. The rage that filled me at that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Sarah hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been planning to steal my children's entire financial futures. Detective Williams, what happens now? We're filing federal charges against your sister for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The question is, what happens with your parents? The evidence suggests they were paid accomplices, but they might be willing to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. That afternoon, Detective Williams arranged for my parents to come to the station for questioning. I wasn't allowed to be present during their interview, but he briefed me on the results afterward. Your parents are claiming they didn't understand the full scope of what your sister was doing. They admit to providing her with family information in exchange for money, but they say she told them it was for legitimate business purposes. Do you believe them? Frankly, it doesn't matter what I believe. The evidence shows they accepted money in exchange for providing personal information that was used for fraudulent purposes. That makes them accomplices, regardless of their claimed ignorance. 2 days later, Sarah was arrested by federal agents. The local news covered the story as part of a series about identity theft rings, and while my name was protected as a victim, the details that were released painted a picture of a criminal operation that had been going on for years. My parents called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that alternated between claiming innocence and begging me to somehow make the legal problems go away. They seemed to believe that because I was the victim, I had some kind of control over the prosecution. Dimitri, please call us back. We didn't know Sarah was doing anything illegal. She told us she was starting a consulting business and needed family references for client verification. We never meant for you to get hurt. But other voicemails revealed a different story. Son, you need to understand that if we go to prison, we'll lose the house anyway. And if Sarah goes to federal prison, she'll never be able to pay back the money she owes. Fighting this isn't going to help anyone. They were still thinking about this in terms of financial consequences rather than understanding the fundamental violation of trust and criminal behavior that had been going on. I decided to respond to their calls with one final conversation. I wanted them to understand exactly how their choices had affected me and my children, and I wanted to make it clear that their legal problems were the direct result of their own criminal behavior. When I called my mother back, she answered on the first ring. Dimitri, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for days. You have to help us fix this misunderstanding. Mom, this isn't a misunderstanding. You and Dad took money in exchange for providing Sarah with personal information that she used to steal my identity and defraud banks. That's a federal crime. We didn't know what she was really doing with the information. She said it was for business purposes. Even if that were true, which I doubt, you still accepted money for giving out family members' personal information without their permission. You gave her Jake and Emma's social security numbers. She was planning to destroy their credit before they even became adults. There was silence on the other end of the line. Mom, do you understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me during a medical emergency. You participated in a criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed your grandchildren's financial futures. Dimitri, please. We made mistakes, but we're still your family. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive us and help us through this difficult time. The time to think about family loyalty was when I was lying in a hospital bed asking for help with my children. The time to consider consequences was before you started accepting money for criminal activity. I can't help you now, and frankly, I wouldn't help you if I could. You're really going to abandon your own parents when we need you most? No, Mom. You abandoned me and my children when we needed you most. What's happening now is simply the natural consequence of choices you made over the course of 2 years. I hung up and immediately blocked their phone numbers. I was done being manipulated and guilt-tripped by people who had systematically betrayed my trust and endangered my family's financial security. But the most important call came from Amanda Rodriguez later that week. Dimitri, I have good news and concerning news. The good news is that the criminal investigation has cleared you of any liability for the fraudulent loans. The banks will be removing those accounts from your credit report, and you won't be responsible for any of the debt. What's the concerning news? Detective Williams wants to meet with you again. He says they've discovered something during Sarah's interrogation that you need to know about immediately. When I met with Detective Williams the next day, he had a federal agent with him named Jennifer Walsh. Mr. Dimitri, Agent Walsh is with the FBI, and she's been investigating the identity theft ring that your sister was part of. What she's discovered affects you directly. Agent Walsh opened a laptop and showed me a screen filled with database entries. Mr. Dimitri, your sister's computer contained information about an international identity theft operation. American personal information, including yours, was being sold to criminal organizations overseas for use in various fraud schemes. What does that mean? It means your identity was scheduled to be sold to buyers in Romania who specialize in creating false documents for immigration fraud. If you hadn't reported your sister's activities when you did, your personal information would have been used by criminals on the other side of the world. Agent Walsh explained that my decision to investigate my family's financial deception and file criminal charges had inadvertently helped the FBI break up an international criminal network. Your quick action to report the identity theft prevented your information from being sold overseas, and it also provided us with the evidence we needed to arrest the other members of this criminal organization. How many other victims were there? Based on what we've found so far, at least 300 people across 15 states had their identities stolen and sold through this network. Your sister was one of the most productive members of the group. 300 victims. Sarah hadn't just been manipulating our family for personal gain. She'd been systematically destroying people's lives for profit, using our parents' house as a base of operations and family members as her primary targets. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, but it was also validating to know that my decision to take legal action had helped protect hundreds of other innocent victims from the same kind of financial devastation that I'd barely avoided. 2 weeks after filing the criminal charges, I finally heard the knock that would bring this entire ordeal to a close, but it wasn't the knock I was expecting. When I opened the door 2 weeks after cutting all contact with my family, I expected to see my parents on my doorstep, perhaps ready to finally apologize and take responsibility for their actions. Instead, I found FBI agent Jennifer Walsh standing there with a serious expression and a folder in her hands. Mr. Dimitri, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but there have been some significant developments in your sister's case that I need to discuss with you immediately. I invited Agent Walsh in, and she sat down at my kitchen table with the gravity of someone about to deliver life-changing news. Your sister has been cooperating with our investigation in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. What she's told us has revealed that this identity theft operation was much larger and more dangerous than we initially realized. Agent Walsh opened her folder and showed me printouts of computer files that made my blood run cold. Your sister's computer contained detailed files on dozens of families across central Texas. She wasn't just stealing random identities. She was specifically targeting families with young children because those families tend to have stable financial profiles and clean credit histories. You mean she was deliberately going after parents? Exactly. And the international buyers she was working with weren't just using the stolen identities for credit card fraud. They were creating complete false identities for people trying to enter the United States illegally. Agent Walsh explained that the Romanian criminal organization that had been buying American identities was part of a human trafficking network. They would use stolen identities to create documentation for people being smuggled into the country, often for purposes of forced labor or sexual exploitation. Mr. Dimitri, your identity wasn't just going to be used for financial fraud. It was going to be used to help criminals bring victims of human trafficking into the United States. The revelation was overwhelming. My sister hadn't just been stealing money, she'd been participating in crimes that enabled some of the worst forms of human exploitation imaginable. How did you find all this out? When we arrested your sister, we also executed search warrants on several other locations connected to the identity theft ring. We found evidence of the trafficking connection at a warehouse in Houston that was being used as a document forgery operation. Agent Walsh showed me photographs of the warehouse, which contained industrial-scale printing equipment and thousands of fake identification documents using stolen American identities. Based on the dates in your sister's computer files, your identity was scheduled to be sold to the trafficking organization next month. If you hadn't reported the identity theft when you did someone using your name, and information might have been brought into the country as a trafficking victim within the next few weeks. The timing was chilling. If I hadn't discovered my parents' financial deception during my medical emergency, if I hadn't investigated their lies and uncovered Sarah's criminal activity, if I hadn't acted quickly to protect myself legally, my identity could have been used to facilitate human trafficking within a matter of weeks. Agent Walsh continued with more revelations that painted an even darker picture of my family's involvement. Your parents' cooperation with the investigation has revealed that your sister had been using their house for much more than just storing documents. They were allowing her to use their address as a mailing location for fraudulent credit cards and fake identification documents. They knew about that. They claimed they thought she was running a legitimate mail forwarding business for people who moved frequently, but the evidence suggests they were aware that something illegal was happening and chose to ignore it in exchange for the money she was paying them. The postal violations alone would add federal charges to whatever my parents were already facing for their participation in the identity theft scheme. But Agent Walsh wasn't finished with her revelations. Mr. Dimitri, there's one more thing you need to know. During your sister's interrogation, she revealed that she had been planning to expand her operation by recruiting other family members to help gather personal information from their social circles. What do you mean? She was going to ask you to help her collect information about your coworkers and neighbors under the pretense of starting a marketing consulting business. She had already prepared a business plan and incorporation documents that would have made you an unwitting accomplice in her criminal activities. If my parents had agreed to watch my children during my surgery, if they hadn't chosen the Elton John concert over family responsibility, if their betrayal hadn't led me to investigate their financial situation, Sarah would have approached me within the next month with a fake business opportunity that would have made me an unwitting participant in international criminal activity. Agent Walsh, this is almost too much to process. If I had agreed to help with her fake business, what would have happened to me? You would have been criminally liable for conspiracy to commit identity theft and potentially accessory to human trafficking. Even if you genuinely believed you were helping with a legitimate business, the fact that you were collecting personal information that was used for criminal purposes would have made you legally responsible. The irony was staggering. My parents' selfish decision to prioritize a concert over their grandchildren's welfare had actually saved me from becoming an unwitting participant in federal crimes. Agent Walsh closed her folder and looked at me directly. Mr. Dimitri, I want you to understand something important. Your quick action to report your sister's identity theft didn't just protect your own family. The evidence you provided has helped us arrest 17 people connected to this trafficking network. We've also rescued 12 victims who were being held against their will in Houston. 12 human trafficking victims had been rescued because I'd filed police reports after discovering that my parents had lied about needing financial help. The chain of events that started with a medical emergency and a refused request for babysitting had led to breaking up an international criminal organization. What happens to my parents now? They're facing federal charges for conspiracy and mail fraud, but their cooperation with our investigation will likely result in reduced sentences. They'll probably receive probation and community service rather than prison time. And Sarah, your sister is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The identity theft charges alone carry significant sentences, and the connection to human trafficking makes it much worse. That evening, I sat in my living room with Jake and Emma watching them play with the same dinosaur puzzle they'd worked on with Martha during my recovery from surgery. The normalcy of their childhood felt precious and fragile after learning how close we'd all come to being destroyed by criminal activity that I'd never known was happening. My parents' betrayal during my medical emergency had felt like the worst thing that could happen to our family. But their betrayal had actually saved us from something infinitely worse. If they hadn't chosen their selfish priorities over family responsibility, I might never have discovered the financial deception that led me to uncover the criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed our lives. The twins were safe. Our financial future was secure, and I'd helped law enforcement rescue victims of horrible crimes. Sometimes the worst betrayal can lead to the most important protection, even when you don't realize it at the time. But there was still one more revelation to come that would put everything in perspective and show me just how much good had come from this painful experience. 6 months after that knock on my door from Agent Walsh, I received a letter that brought the entire ordeal to a close, in a way I never could have imagined. The letter was from the U.S. Attorney's Office, informing me that my cooperation with the federal investigation had been instrumental in securing convictions against all 17 members of the human trafficking network. Sarah received 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to identity theft, wire fraud conspiracy, and aiding human trafficking operations. My parents received 2 years of probation and were required to pay restitution to all of the victims whose identities had been compromised through their participation in the scheme. But the most meaningful part of the letter was information about the impact of the investigation. The trafficking network that had been broken up was responsible for bringing over 200 victims into the United States over the course of 3 years. The 12 victims who were rescued during the raids were now in witness protection and receiving help to rebuild their lives. The restitution payments from the criminal convictions combined with my decision to stop sending money to my parents allowed me to establish substantial college funds for Jake and Emma. By the time they reach 18, they'll have enough money saved to attend any university they choose without taking on student debt. Martha became our regular babysitter and eventually transitioned into a part-time nanny role that gives me the flexibility to focus on both work and parenting. Her childcare agency offered me a significant discount on their services as a thank you for referring several other families who needed trustworthy care. The twins have thrived with the stable, honest environment that replaced the chaos and deception that had been surrounding our family. They rarely ask about their grandparents anymore, but when they do, I explain that sometimes people make choices that have serious consequences, and that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. My parents sent a formal apology letter through their probation officer about 4 months after their sentencing. The letter acknowledged their betrayal during my medical emergency, admitted their deception about their financial situation, and took full responsibility for their participation in Sarah's criminal activities. They asked for eventual forgiveness, while expressing understanding that rebuilding trust would take time and might never be possible. I appreciate their acknowledgement of responsibility, but I haven't responded to the letter. Some betrayals cut too deep to simply move past, especially when they involve endangering children and participating in criminal activities. I found peace in accepting that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and shared values, not genetic connections and social expectations. The experience taught me that protecting my children's safety and future sometimes requires making difficult decisions about family relationships. Blood relation doesn't create an obligation to tolerate harmful behavior. And sometimes, the most loving action is setting firm boundaries that protect innocent people from toxic influences. Several neighbors who learned about our situation through the news coverage have become genuine friends. Our social circle now includes families who share our values of honesty, reliability, and putting children's needs first. The support system that replaced my biological family is stronger and more trustworthy than what we lost. Jake and Emma have learned valuable lessons about the importance of honesty and the consequences of deception. They understand that trust has to be earned through consistent actions, not demanded based on relationships or promises. These lessons will serve them well as they navigate their own relationships throughout their lives. The FBI presented me with a commendation for civic cooperation in recognition of my role in exposing the criminal network. More importantly, Agent Walsh told me that my willingness to pursue legal action against family members had encouraged other victims to come forward with similar cases, leading to additional arrests and prosecutions. Detective Williams later explained that domestic identity theft cases are often difficult to prosecute because victims are reluctant to file charges against family members. My decision to put legal justice ahead of family loyalty had created a precedent that helped other victims understand that they could seek protection from criminal relatives without guilt or shame. The money I once sent to my parents now funds educational activities, family vacations, and savings accounts that will give my children opportunities I never had. We take trips to museums and national parks. We invest in music lessons and sports equipment. We build memories based on shared experiences rather than financial obligations and emotional manipulation. Looking back on that day when I lay in a hospital bed, betrayed and alone, I realize it was the beginning of the most important transformation of my life. What felt like abandonment was actually liberation. What seemed like family destruction was actually family protection. I learned that true family loyalty means protecting those who cannot protect themselves, not enabling destructive behavior from those who should know better. I discovered that forgiveness doesn't require continuing harmful relationships, and that sometimes the most loving action is creating distance that prevents further damage. The twins and I now live in a world built on honesty, consistency, and genuine care for each other's well-being. We've replaced toxic family drama with peaceful family traditions. We've exchanged financial manipulation for financial security. We've traded deception and betrayal for trust and transparency. My children will grow up understanding that relationships should enhance their lives, not endanger them. They'll know that they have the right to expect honesty and respect from everyone in their lives, regardless of how those relationships are labeled or what social expectations might suggest. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the most important protection. Sometimes losing toxic family members creates space for healthy relationships to flourish. And sometimes the most painful lesson teaches the most valuable wisdom about what family really means. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family loyalty and protecting yourself or your loved ones from harmful behavior? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help it reach others who might be dealing with similar family situations. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming difficult relationships and building stronger families. And please share this with anyone who needs to hear that choosing your own well-being over toxic family obligations is not selfish but necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that you have the right to surround yourself and your children with people who genuinely care about your well-being. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never apologize for protecting the people who matter most.